This. So, how many of you ended up with the suggested tree component or component tree of the lab? I guess, like, how many of you have basically 5 components where app is your main component? Okay. Oh, sorry, 4. I forgot to count. And how many of you have like multiple state? Like maybe state in app and maybe state somewhere else? Okay. Some of you have multiple states. Depending, this app doesn't really need multiple states. Maybe later on, like if you're curious, then just like approach me, and then we can look at maybe why you decided to go with an extra state, which might be okay, and it might be a use case that I just don't know about, or where it makes sense to have state. So cool. So basically, we have this is what our component tree should look like, where we have an app that has 2 children, a form, and a to-do list. The to-do list has children, which will be to-do items individually. And if we think of this like from the wireframe perspective, we have something like this, where we have like the form here, and so that will be the form, this will be the list. And inside of the list, we have list items. This list items, you want it to have some text and welcome here. Cool. So let's see. I think I had a solution here. Let me share this link. Go back to Slack. Share that so that you can connect and see all my code. And basically, this is what we have here. We have the input text. You type in something. Then the notification pops up. Another notification pops up. And for the deleting, we have the same behavior. You delete and you get that. What would you say was like the toughest part, so that we just focus on those for this lab? What was like maybe what part you're struggling currently on, or what part, if you finish, was one of the toughest part. Jonathan? Deleting the to-do. What else? Somebody else? Yes,
wrapping my brain around getting the user input from the form over to the to-do item.
Let's do to the to-do item, you said.
Right. For like child kind of thing.
To and pass it to do it. Okay. Anything else? Joy? How to put different functions? Say more about that. Like what functions?
We have like different functions to handle different aspects of the business. And also the coming out
Okay. So I guess like for the functions that we mostly use, we basically in our React components we end up with two kinds of functions. We end up with event listeners or with for I guess at least for now, most of the time we have the event listeners to handle the input, to handle buttons, and lifecycle methods basically. So let's do event handlers, I guess. And lifecycle methods. Cool. Okay, anything else? Yes, Savita?
Maybe it's the same thing as Doug, but like how to get the input to stay after you clear the form. So after the state restarts, the form is wiped clear and the items are stored in the array, but they're not showing up on the list.
I see.
I guess basically clearing the input field, but still keeping the items on the list.
Right, so you want the input field to go back to blank, but you want to keep the list to show. Okay. Yeah, I think that will be part of the event handlers. We can get to see that. Cool. So sort of like listing out the responsibilities, the app will manage state. We have form. The responsibility of the form is to take user input. The to-do list. They call it to-dos list. This functionality of this component, or the responsibility should just be to display a list of items, basically. So say display list of items, and then the to-do item. The responsibility of the to-do item will just be to display a single to-do, right? Well, to display a single to-do also as well as offering a delete button for whenever the user wants to delete that element. So display to-do, and I'll say offer delete button. Cool. So if we go with this that we have, we could build. I know that and I think I did this also at the beginning, I'll build out what it was gonna look like first, and then at the end I will do the functionality basically. So in this case, even though I have, if you are connected to my code, you can see that I have basically the components that I mentioned earlier. I have app. Do I have the to-do? Let's see. Well, I think I didn't implement the to-do list component. I just have it straight here, but I'm gonna take that out to its own component. So let me basically copy this, cut it. In components, just create another file called to-dos list.jsx. And here, just gonna paste this here for now. Let's leave it like that. Or maybe let's have the function const. No, not form, but to-dos list. That just returns this. And then just export it. Cool. So I'll have something like the form and the to-do list. Cool. All the to-do item will be imported in the to-do list. So let me move this from here to here. And also we need to import React. Cool. Let's just get to see how this. Let's just fix this error and we are back on track. To-dos list. Oh, this. Cool. So basically here you can see that without even looking at like the functionality, I end up with roughly, but if we look at this return on the render, we see the two children that I was talking about, which is the form, the first children, and the to-do list, the second children. The toast container is, as you saw in the documentation, it's going to be a third children that I just didn't include in our original one because it's a component that comes from the React Toastify. It's not really our component. And cool, but we end up with these two things, right? Now, what I want to do is talk about the state, for instance. So, what do we need to keep in state? What are the things, like whenever you're thinking of state, you should think about what are the things that are going to change over time and that affect your UI, that affects the user interface, what the user is seeing. And that stuff, whatever is changing over time and is affecting what the user is seeing, that's the things that you want to put on your state. So here, what are the things that change and that will affect what the user is seeing? The input. Let's do maybe. Over time. UI. input. And what's the other thing? Brianni, what do you think? Was the we know that the input, whenever you type in something, that text is changing over time, and it's changing what the user is seeing. Basically, the user sees that new letters are typed in. What is the other thing that changes in our UI that we want to care about for this project? Right. So the to-dos themselves. Why does how does that change over time, and how does it affect our UI? Yeah.
It affects the UI because you show up and they remove them, so they don't show up.
Right. So it affects the UI, as Brianna said, because when you add one, a new thing pops up underneath, and when you remove one, it gets removed from the UI, and you will get fewer to-dos. Anything else that we might be missing here about the state? Or is there anything else that we could think of that changes, that affects our UI and changes over time? Right, there's nothing else. Or at least as of right now. So in state, what we can have is these two things basically: a place to keep track of the user input, and a place to keep track of to-dos that are added or removed. Right? And I'm going to remove all these functions. So we write them. Let me remove this. Basically, have our three children. Let's go to the form. Yeah. Cool. So, any questions up until this point about the components, what it goes in state? I think Ben is here. Let me just get the. Cool. So maybe let's get the form to work, and then we transition to what we're going to be doing with Ben. Right. So, and this will be sort of like the handlers. How do we keep track of? How do we access the user input, basically? Cool. So, as we saw that these two things are going to change over time, that's why we put them in state. Now the thing is, how do we update this state, basically? How do we keep track of the current value of the text input? Oh, and what do you think? How do you keep track of the changes that happen in the input box in the form? So that's correct. We need to add an event listener to it. So if we, well, let's go to the form. And let me get rid of this. So we basically have a form component that is literally just returning a form, and it has an input. And in fact, if we go to the DOM, oops, let's do, wait, let's do this one. Let me comment this out for now. Let's do terminal. We see that we still have the input. Right now, and nothing works. My form is refreshing and all of that. But then can somebody like describe what the process is for adding an event listener to an input box and having the text of that input box being kept track of in the state? Lewis?
You have to pass it the prompt through the app, I think.
Okay, and why do we need to do that? Yes, that's correct.
So that way because the parent needs to have it to pass to the child. So if the function hangs out in the app, that way we put that into the
Somebody can help, Douglas? So we do need to pass it through props. What is it that we pass through props? In this use case, Joy, what do you think? The handle function. Let's call it event listener. Event listener, sometimes also known as event handlers. Cool. So we need an event handler function. We need to pass that through props to the form. So let's maybe do these two steps. What should we call this function? Handle change. So let's do this. Cool. So I have the function. I'm going to pass it to the form as props by saying handle change. Handle change. This dot handle change. Cool. So I have the event listener. I'm passing it through props. Have an event listener function. I'm passing it through props. What else do we need, or is this enough? Brianna, what do you think?
Also need like a handle submit, so when we submit the form, so we just have to know the state will change.
Okay, that's correct. We will need a handle submit, but for this one, we want this function to like handle the input box that we have, so that we can keep track of whatever the user types into that input box in the state. So sort of like on the same line, yeah. Set state. This function should set the state. Okay. And what kind of state do we want to set? Or I guess. Actually, so let's actually maybe let me backtrack here a little bit. Let's do console log input value changed. So we have this. We have a function handle change that we want this function to be called whenever the user types in something in that input box. How do we get this function to be called whenever the user types in something in the input box? Yeah.
So you would go to the input box.
Okay.
In this case, it's the form, so the form component.
So we have the form component here.
And on
Okay.
props dot handle change.
Right. So here we will have props handle change. How is it that in here? Well, let's see if this works. So we have a handles change function that lives in the app. We pass that down to the children of app form, and form will pass it to the input box. Question in the back.
Wouldn't you put it in the form as an on submit?
Yes, but we haven't gotten to that yet. So let's see if this works. I think this might work. Let's open the console here. So let me close this. Console. We get some errors. Let's ignore those for now. Cool. So I type something here and I see as many characters as I see, that many times the function has been called. Cool. Does this make sense? About how you're passing in. So this is what we call event listeners, event handlers, whatever you want. One of those two are the same thing. It are functions that are listening for events on input boxes or even on divs. It doesn't have to be on an input box or a button. You can, if you remember from our unit 2, there are a ton of events you can listen for. You can listen for mouse over. You can listen for, I think there's one mouse leave, focus, and there are many, many more. You can listen for any one of those events. In here, we're listening for the change event that happens in this input box as I type something in that box. Every time something happens, that event is fired, which in turn fires my function, my event listener. Cool. So we get here that that console log happening. That's great. Now, how do we get the text that is in the input box onto the state? Vanille. Sorry, not Vanille. Owen. Event target value. Cool. Okay, so that is correct. How do we get this event target value? Like, where does it come from, basically? Somebody can help Owen?
The argument in the handle change function?
The argument in the handle change function, which is right here in the parentheses, we get the event. And again, this is true to all event listeners. All event listeners get the event as an argument. So from here, then we now have an event target value. The target, what is the target? What is the event target?
On-change event?
Say that again?
The on-change event in the input box?
That would be the event. The event is the on-change event. But who's the target of that event? It's the input box itself, right? Is the input box itself. So this here, do you remember like how this is sort of connecting to linked lists? How we have like a node that is pointing to another node. This is sort of like similar where we have an event object that is pointing to another object, which is the target. And that target is the input box itself. That input box has a value property. And in this value property is that we get whatever the user types in that box. So if we console log this, for instance, if I put it here, so I want to console log input value change and immediately just console log whatever the event target is, the event target value. So we can see that as I type my name, the function gets called on each keystroke that I enter in this input box. And we have that at the end, event.target.value is the text that I type in that input box. Cool. So once we have the, even when I remove, you can see that every single it happens one at a time, basically. So questions maybe about the event handler, the event listener. Yep.
Maybe not directly this, but do we not have to put the value into the form itself on the so we do like value equals
Yeah.
this dot state
Down here.
whatever we call the
That's correct.
Sorry.
Give me like maybe 15 minutes.
Didn't always turn off by some time. Oh, you want me
Yeah.
to leave?
No, like just give me like 15 minutes.
15 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So, right, that what you were saying is we want the input value to feed back into the form, and we're gonna get to that.
yeah, I figured I was trying to get this down.
Cool. So from here, we're able to read whatever the value of that input box is. Now, how do we set it to the state then? How do we save this to the state? Owen.
This does that state.
What is it that we pass through this .set state? An object, that's correct. A new state. And then here, where is it that we want to save? What property of state do we want to use to keep track of the text in the input box? To do text in this case, right? So we could say, I want the to do text to be equal to the event that target that value. And this then ends up being an event listener that is listening for changes on that input box and updating the state to keep track of the text in the input box. And if we go back to the browser, put it here on the side, go to components to see the state changing. Once we go to app, we see that we have a state that has two parts, to do text and to do's. And as I type in something here, we see that the state in the app component is being set, right? Cool. Any questions or comments about the event listener? You want to make sure that you're very familiar with this pattern of passing down an event listener to a component, that then that component, in this case our form, uses it on an actual input, and then that event listener sets the state. Questions, comments, thoughts? You probably have something similar. Let me know if you have something that maybe is not like this. Maybe you're doing a few extra work that might not be needed for listening for the change on the input box. Cool. So, okay, what would be next after this? Khadija, what do you think? After this, after we have handled the text and we know that we can put it, we have it on state, what do we want to do next? Like for the app to work in general? A little bit louder? Yeah, I think you're down the right path. You're down the right path, so a little bit louder. Correct. So we want, when we hit enter, we want to that whatever we type in here to go down in the list. Now, I think it was helpful when I was learning to think about when do I want that to happen? Like at what point in time do I want that to happen? And we know that we have the content here in app state. Now thinking of when do you want the element to be appended to the list, what does that tell us about how we have to approach this? Sergio, what do you think?
We said we need to press enter.
Okay, so I want it when I press enter. So is there any way in which I could listen for when the user press enter on the input box?
I found a property called on key pressed.
Okay, so,
With the event, I would say if event not event dot key.
raise your hand if you use on key press, which will be okay. Okay. What other ways do you use it? Hugo. On submit on the form. Yep. So that works. You can listen for the on key press event, and whenever and then you probably have to do an if statement checking if the
event variable there's a property called dot key. If dot key is equal to enter, I haven't scheduled, but it's going.
Got it. Yeah. So that I will say that's another way to do it. The problem with that way is that if we have multiple input boxes, then you will like listen for the enter on which one, on the last one, on all of them. You know what I mean? So it could be a little bit difficult to manage on a larger app or form. What you could do is, if you remember that when you hit enter on an input box, the submit event is fired, then you can just listen for the submit event, and that will take care of that, and you don't have to like listen for a specific key. On submit in the form though, because you have on key press on the input.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Cool. So, any questions about like when is it that we want this to happen? Cool. So, who could, from the people that are online? Let me see. This is always a pain in the butt that it doesn't let you like allow people. Once I set this session as read only, I guess it doesn't let me change it, or I haven't looked into it. Who could guide me about like writing an event listener for the submit event? Basically, or I guess when you're running an event listener, you just write a regular function. What makes a function an event listener is that you're using it as an onChange and onSubmit. Other than that, it's just a function. So how do we start an event listener? Joanne? Handle submit. Pass an event as an argument. Cool. So, as Joanne is saying, since this function will handle the form submission, we'll need to add an event that prevent default, so that the form, so that submitting the form doesn't refresh the page. Does that make sense for everyone? Cool. So let's do event that prevent default. Cool. And let's say we have this console.log um, forms submitted. How do we get then now? Who can guide me about having this function be firing when the submit event happens? Any volunteers in the back? Peter, could you guide me through how to attach this function so that when we submit the form, or when the event for submitting the form is fired, we see this console log form submitted?
Sure, so on the form,
So
so you can have the handle submit, so on your form, in your form file,
okay.
you need to put on submit in the form.
Okay. So like here.
And it's going to equal props.handle submit.
Props.handle submit. Cool.
And then in your, on your app file, in form, next, right after handle change, put
And why wouldn't this be enough?
excuse me,
Why wouldn't this be enough? Why would like this just be enough? You're down the right path.
Because the function is written in the other file.
Uh-huh.
It's taking, the forms file is taking it in from the apps file, so you're transferring it in. If you just left it as that and didn't tell the form in the apps function which function to send there, it wouldn't know what to do.
Well, did everyone hear that?
I'm not sure if that made any sense. If it makes sense.
So this is what I call, this is what, when we're looking at props, this is what I call, like, the component is expecting a prop. Is expecting a prop handle submit. And I like to think of dealing with props in two steps. One, the component expecting the prop, and the other part, the parent component actually passing the prop to that component for it to use it. Right, so that's the second part that you were describing, Peter, again. So what do I do here?
You could write handle submit.
So let me do that like on a separate line. Handle submit.
Equals, and then curly brackets, this dot handle submit.
And again, why do we need to do this? Because the function lives in the parent component and we needed to call it in the child component. Right? I think let's leave it there. As we go to the browser and we see the console, we get that when I hit enter, the form gets submitted. If I hit enter again, the form is submitted again. And we can continue on that later. Cool. So
Okay, ready, set, go?
Yep.
Okay, there were other questions, but I didn't read them. I only read the first one because I'm really lazy. But we'll do the other ones soon. But let's
Sure.
do the first one first, right away.
Actually, yeah. We were
Did you
looking.
already do the first one?
No. To see the popularity of the questions.
Okay. This is a sweet 3D printed thing. Thanks, dude.
And we
This is for
get.
Christmas tree.
Well, more, any really, I
Or a
have
Hanukkah bush.
Exactly.
So it seems that everyone got the first two, and they're more interested on
Everyone got the first one?
first one.
Everyone got it? Oh, you're lying to me right now.
They didn't vote. That's what you get for
Didn't
not
vote.
voting.
What the fuck, dude?
Listen, if I could go for all of them, I would go for all of them.
Alright, we're gonna go through all of them. We're gonna go through all of them fast.
Got it. Sorry.
Plug me in. Plug me in, baby boy.
Actually, we need another.
We got a dongle. Alright, but anyway, the first one's great. First one's great. Classic question. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but so if they are, let me know, and I apologize in advance. But like, I want to give you an idea of my understanding of the relative challenge of these, and specifically the framing of that relative challenge around like in what stage of the pipeline will you do it? That first question was, hey, I have a large array of numbers. How many pairs sum to some k, right? Some constant k, right? That's the first question. I know this question because I asked this question, and I have been asked this question like in the order of 100 times. This is a reader question. What I mean by that is that it's very easy, and it's something that we ask right at the beginning to see like if we should just not ask them any more questions at all, and like not make them feel bad in this interview because like they can't do this really easy thing. We're not going to ask them the real meat and potatoes question. That's going to be the one that we evaluate them. So this is the kind of question that you want them to just answer just like right away. And the answer to that question is. Okay, I'm going to try that one more time. All right, so the question is, hey, you've got an array of numbers. How many of these sum to some particular number? And the answer to this question is hash tables, correct, right? We use a hash table because all you need to do is you need to know its pair, right? So there's just like a little bit of math here, just a little itty bitty bit of math. But the really interesting question is, the really interesting answer is hash tables. Capital fucking H. Hash tables. I shit you not, it's the right answer. Okay, so what's interesting about this particular question is the mechanism of using hash tables. Who wants to tell me how we're going to use hash tables to solve this problem? There's like kind of 3 solutions that are all the exact same, just depending on the angle that you look at it. Who got this question and wants to come up and talk about it? You good? No. Okay. Somebody else. Doug? You get it?
I grouped, this is the one actually I selected.
Nailed it. Oh, you didn't get it.
But I mean, I brute forced it. I just made like.
So brute force is the exact opposite of the right answer.
Exactly.
Okay, don't do that. Here, you're doing great. Love it. It gives you constant time lookup, right? So if I had some number that I was trying to sum to